Hello there. There are many different androids that we have encountered in the Star Trek universe. The Prelor and the Kravik, those creepy androids of Muds. There have been several forms of artificial intelligence encountered in the Star Trek universe. Again, I cite the Prelor and the Kravik, as well as many others. But one inventor, creator and scientist and madman really led the way from the Federation's point of view in the creation of artificial life. Not just a machine to do your bidding, not just another tool or robot to help humanity and the Federation achieve whatever goals they want to achieve, but actually something truly magnificent. And that man was Dr. Soongs. Soong was a certifiable, absolute genius in robotics. Though, of course, Soong did not work in a vacuum, and it is that assistance we are here to talk about today. His wife and mother to his creations, Juliana Tainer. Before we get started, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon if you want to be notified about any of the videos that I currently upload, including ones in this current series, if you're watching them while I'm uploading them. Juliana Tainer was born in 2303. At a young age on the planet of Omicron Theta, a Federation colony world, she would meet an older man who would sweep her off her feet, become the love of her life, at least in those early days, Dr. Soongs. Her mother disapproving of the relationship, the two would sneak off world to get married in secret on Movella 4. Though a geologist by profession, she would be instrumental in assisting Soong, her husband, in the development of the various different early androids that he would create, most of which would be unsuccessful, and she would find each successive attempt to create one of these artificially sentient creatures heartbreaking to watch it simply fail to reach its full potential and not survive, every time feeling a little worse. The early androids were fairly basic. We see one example of these in the form of B4, but we know the two most successful designs were Lore and Data. Now, Lore is his own thing, and we'll get to him, but Lore will shelve. Data, of course, was much more successful and didn't have many of the intrinsic flaws that his brother had. In his programming, Juliana would be responsible for giving him a creative outlet. Despite his lack of emotions, she felt that he needed a creative outlet. She gave him an interest intrinsically in music and painting as a form of artistic expression to sort of give him an outlet for something he might not truly conceptualize that he had. Because we all know that despite the fact that Data didn't have emotions, he was clearly a loving person. And fight me, of course he was. Look at him, he was a puppy. Juliana, of course, being the husband of Noonien, was a bit of an outcast among society. Noonien was considered something of a mad scientist, but she remained at his side in helping him develop these androids, trying to educate Data and teach him. One of the things she had to convince him to do was wear clothes, because Data in his early days didn't like to wear clothes. He didn't feel that they were necessary because he was an android. He had no sense of modesty. But she had to teach him that other people did and were uncomfortable with his nudity. So he would eventually start wearing clothes. In many ways, this early Data was much like an infant in this regard. She also, though, would be the one who would insist on leaving Data behind after the attack of the crystalline entity, simply because she was concerned and afraid that he would become like Lore, and she just couldn't see that happen again. She was heartbroken from the first failed attempts at creating these Soong-type androids with the positronic matrix that would become known as Data and Lore, but we know that Lore was dangerous. Data, of course, was not, but she was afraid that he would be. It was a decision that she regretted. After the attack of the crystalline entity, she was injured. Her and her husband fled the world, but unfortunately she lapsed into a coma. Noonien, unable to see his wife and love of his life die, he would go on to create what is arguably the most advanced of any of the androids he ever created. Now note that I do say the ones he created, because of course subsequent generations of androids created by his son, which are future stories which we will cover, were arguably more advanced, if not the same at least, or advanced in different ways perhaps. But in terms of being near human, this android was near perfect. He created an exact duplicate of his wife in android form, but had all kinds of modifications and advances that he didn't give to Data or to Lore. For example, she had the ability to age gracefully and naturally and would live a normal human lifespan. She was warm to the touch, she had veins, a pulse, she could sweat, she could cry. Her hair would turn grey, but she was still underneath an android. He wanted to make sure that she would never know what she was. Her programming, such as it was all autonomic. The woman inside, the person, the human being, the soul, for lack of a better term, was transferred in a form of synaptic transfer technique he pioneered to transfer her consciousness from her organic body that was slowly dying into the android body. He waited, of course, until Juliana's body naturally passed away before activating the android, noting that when she looked up at him and smiled, he realized that not only had it worked, but this was her. She was alive again. She was her. Now, although they would continue to live in isolation, it was that very isolation that eventually drove a wedge between them. She wanted to leave. She couldn't just stay here while he continued his research and his work. She wanted to leave and eventually would leave Noonien, divorcing him and leaving the planet and him and that part of her life behind her. She would eventually move to the planet of Atria 4, where she would meet her future husband and second love of her life, Tainer, a member of the Atrian species. Of course, like everyone else, he would be completely fooled and simply believe that she was human. Despite her android form, she had no unnatural strength or survivability, or particularly any other special skills. In 2370, the USS Enterprise NCC-1701D, with her son, Data, on board, would visit the planet to assist in some scientific work. She would board the vessel, but she, although instantly recognized Data, he did not know her. This is because his memory had been erased. She would inform him of who she was and that she was basically his mother. He would eventually begin to address her as such after dodging her a little bit, but eventually after spending some time with her, he would begin to pick up on a few quirks. Notably, he noticed her blinking, not to mention her violin playing. These were all telltale things that only he or perhaps Lore would have noticed. Her blinking was clearly a program. Nothing artificial could ever truly be random, so there was a program created by Soong that allowed an android to give the appearance of randomness in its blinking. He recognized this pattern in her eyes, and in the flawlessness and her recreation of her violin playing, although excellent, was like his. It was a recreation and it was mimicking. These were the autonomic systems that I mentioned earlier that he programmed into her. Later, during an accident, she would be injured and it would be revealed that she was an android, but in this state she would go unconscious. A holographic interface was discovered inside of her, programmed in. Put in a holodeck, this created an illusion of Dr. Soong that could interact with whoever had found this, and he would try to convince them to not tell her and simply prepare her and leave her to be. But it was designed to respond to different people in different ways, and when it realized this hologram was talking with Data, it explained to him what had happened, how she had been injured in the crystalline entity attack, how he couldn't lose her, and that he wanted her to live because he loved her, and he just couldn't live without her. Although she did eventually leave him, he believed that the real Juliana would have done this anyway, eventually, so it was really irrelevant. Data ummed and ahed over whether or not he should tell her, actually believing that perhaps she would better off knowing and had a right to know her true existence, but it had been explained to him that her body would naturally age. It would naturally give out like a human body, and she would live a natural human lifespan, and eventually die of what would be perceived to be old age. This was how she was designed, because he wanted her to believe completely she was human, and never to know her true existence, that she was really dead. He didn't feel she could psychologically handle it, most likely. I mean, who would? That's not exactly a pleasant piece of information to be given. Data would eventually concur and allow his mother to live out her life in blissful ignorance of her true nature, that she was actually an android. But he would tell her that his father had once told him that there was only one great love of his life, and that Data believed that he wasn't referring to his scientific experiments or the creation of Data, but he was actually referring to her. And I believe that what Data meant by that was Juliana, not the android. The android itself, the body she was created for her, as I said, was probably, for Soong's point of view, the finest piece of work he ever created. It was far more advanced than Data. It used a lot of the same basic technology, but its ability to mimic humanity so closely was far beyond what Data or Law were actually capable of. They were advanced in other ways, of course, and we'll get to them in separate videos, but she was certainly an extremely sophisticated and advanced piece of technology, with her being able to comprehend and express complex emotions and thoughts and articulate them in a way that was relatable to humans. She was also designed to mimic humans so closely. She even had a sort of feedback technology that allowed her to fool scans, basically, to make them believe she was human. This was advanced enough to even fool a transporter buffer and system into believing it had transported a human, not a machine. Incredibly advanced piece of technology. And there we have it. Although we don't know a year of her exact death, she may still be alive and kicking somewhere in the galaxy, even outliving her son Data. It's entirely plausible. On that as well, there are a couple of appendixes just to throw into the end of this with her in relation to everything. Her natural death occurred in the year 2338, around the same time, of course, just after the attack by the crystalline entity, and it would be not long after that she would be resurrected as the android. Another piece of trivia, as I said, she had a lot of influence on the development of the androids such as Data. One of her things she wanted to do was actually that she wanted Data to be female. All the androids that had come before were all male. She wanted a daughter, I assume, and she tried to convince Soong to make the next one, Data, female. But Soong went behind her back and, as he'd always done, molded the skull and prosthetics of the android in his own image. So once again, Data, just like Laura and all the others, just looked like Soong. This was done behind her back and she was rather annoyed about it, but it was what it was. She loved Data all the same. And as I said, there we have it. Possibly, let me know in the comments if you agree, the most advanced android creation by Soong. She certainly was the last android that we know of that he created, although Soong did a lot of things that, he kept to himself. There are at least 2 other positronic Soong type androids that are out there, or at least were out there. Whether they were destroyed before the attack by the crystalline entity or survived it and, like before, out there somewhere is not to this date known. We also don't know what they were called. We've got to imagine it was something interesting like Cypher or something, but whatever they were called, whatever they did, they were probably the less advanced versions of B4, so maybe not the most advanced pieces, but I think the line of progression, B4 was fairly simplistic but harmless, Lore was sadistic and not harmless, Data was, well, Data, and Juliana was the culmination of all that work that had come before in the creation of an android that not only believed it was human, but was human for all intents and purposes. It may have had a synthetic inside, but the person was all human. But let me know in the comments below whether you agree with that assessment, whether she really was the most advanced creation that Soong ever made. This was the work culminated after generations of work by the family, starting with Arik Soong switching his vocation from genetics to cybernetics back in the 22nd century, all the way 200 years later to Noonien Soong in the 24th century, completing the work started by what must have been at least his grandfather. And she was the result. We know that there were future generations of androids built by the work done by Bruce Maddox and then by Alton Inigo Soong, as well as Maddox again, in the creation of an entire race of androids that were autonomous and not just B4-like simple machines that were built to serve. But all of that we're going to get to in future episodes. For now, like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell notification icon if you want to be told about any of these videos, because that is the real subscribe button. And with that said, we're at the end of this video. Thank you for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, I hope you enjoyed it, and bye bye. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.